obviously, of course. It's been very well received in Australia. So yeah, hopefully it will be well received over here. I think it's a good feel-good movie. It wasn't always easy along the way, as you saw, but I think it's a story of perseverance and strong self-belief, and yeah, I'm very proud to be sitting up here today because of those reasons.
What was like the first time you saw the movie on the big screen?
I was blown away. I went into the movie with no expectations. I thought it's not going to be exactly the same as my life. Just enjoy it for what it is. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I thought you really captured the essence of the story. You captured Stevie in his natural self, which I thought would be really hard to get out of him on screen because he gets quite nervous in front of the camera at times. But when I watched him up there, it was like watching him at home on the farm. So for me and my family, that's the best part, is to see Stevie playing himself in a movie. You couldn't imagine that in your wildest dreams. And yeah, I absolutely loved it, and I've seen it a fair few times now, and it grabs me every time.
I think there's that thing that although the Melbourne Cup is such an Australian institution, when you make any sporting film, you're looking for the universals. And when I watched the Melbourne Cup that day in 2015, I thought women in racing were silly hats and stupid shoes, and often in the Herald Sun vomiting in bushes the day after was always like that go-to page. I didn't have any idea that women were jockeys. I didn't know one was racing that day. I didn't know the tradition of, how many women had been involved. Obviously, I'd heard of Gay Waterhouse, but, of owners, female owners, and women very involved in the bloodstock industry. So I had, for me, I kind of thought women were decorative in the racing industry, and, it was only, in that day, like literally my brain, was blown. I say my brain is like a nuclear reactor. It just needs kryptonite to go off. Well, Michelle winning that day was like that kryptonite, because I thought, oh my God, of all the sports in the world where men and women could compete equally, it's in the most dangerous sport in the world. And when you go to make a movie, like Rocky's one of my favourite films, and I don't like boxing, you just look for those universal themes. And, for this film, as Michelle says, it's about perseverance, but it's also about family. And family is, means as much to Kiwis as it does to Australians. And I think ultimately, there is, a family at the heart of this film. It is a father-daughter story. And I think the beautiful thing about, racing that I've come to love is how intergenerational it is. Michelle just shared this picture today of Paddy as a jumps jockey in, like, what would that have been, the 50s or something? Yeah. Like, he weighed nothing, he was still really tall, doing this extraordinary, jumps shot of him. And then, hearing that you've got, other members of that generation that were involved, and that love of the horse and that love of racing is passed down. Like, it's no surprise that the first woman to win the Melbourne Cup is the daughter of a trainer, a daughter of a jockey, the youngest of 10, of whom 8 siblings were jockeys. And she's the last of the litter. Like, she's the last chance this family have to, bring home, like, steal from the Aussies their greatest prize, in a way. And I think those, just to speak for how it will land here, I think the core themes of the film are so universal.
So I think we all in this theatre agree that we're going to take ownership of Paddy because well, a lot of them, only Stevie and Michelle are Australians. The rest of them are Kiwis. And I recently did a fabulous documentary about the history of female jockeys, and it was a surprise, but no surprise to me, that New Zealand is where women really started racing. It's where they were accepted in racing, and it was the girls here that agitated for Australians to allow women to ride. But in everything, New Zealand leads the way, and your prime ministerships and first female prime minister, suffragette, and it's kind of no surprise that the Kiwis go, the girl wants to ride, let her ride. If she's as good as the boys, she can compete. So how was it like for the rest of your family and for Dad specifically, seeing your story on the big screen?
Initially, they weren't very keen on the idea, my brothers and sisters, mainly because we're a pretty private family. No one really wants to be up in glitter. And Dad, he wasn't too fussed. Him and Stevie are fairly similar in nature. They don't care too much. Stevie was like, do you want to play yourself in the film? Yeah, I'll give it a go. Not overwhelmed by it at all. And he gets that from Dad. So Dad didn't mind either way, but he was quite excited about it when it was coming out. And yeah, my brothers and sisters took a little while to come on board. They were a bit sort of apprehensive. But as soon as they heard Stevie was playing himself, they were really, sold on the idea of the film and couldn't wait for it to come out.
I hit up all the girls at the races in my pitch because I do see the pains. I've been involved in other biopics where licences have been taken and it's been awkward. It's split families and caused rifts. That my number one stakeholder in this, and not to say that I wanted to, do a hagiography that didn't, I'm sure there are moments in there that Michelle probably didn't want to there, where she's, suspended for dangerous riding and other stuff like that. But, the family was my number one stakeholder, and my pitch to, the sisters, because after I pitched Michelle, I said, I promise you I want to make an inspirational film that we can watch with your whole family and they won't want to punch either of us in the face.
I was going to say, how did you two actually meet?
I stalked her, couldn't get a hold of her management for 3 weeks, and then my friend rang me and she said, Michelle's going to be up at Randwick and she's apparently doing photo call. So I flew myself to Sydney. Like, you might think, I'm Rachel Griffiths, people will return my calls, but Michelle was so inundated and her management were after the race. And they were getting offers from, big players in Hollywood. And so I flew myself to Sydney. I got in a photo line for an hour and a half until finally I got to Michelle and I said, hi, I'm Rachel Griffiths. I've been trying to get through to your management. I want to make an inspirational feminist PG sports film that'll make men cry called Ride Like a Girl. And I promise you, your family won't hate us. And I just look, as a famous person, I couldn't imagine anything worse. And I know how my brothers have coped with that as well. So, I think Michelle trusted me and then Stevie was, the clincher. But, I just couldn't have expressed more profoundly the respect and love I had for them. And Michelle was really interesting, like, just to get away from how did everyone feel, because in some ways they're not the most interesting questions. Michelle is an extraordinary athlete. You saw her life of, resilience. She sucked up stuff as we do as girls, didn't dwell on it, kept her eye on what she felt she was capable of. And, at the end of the day, you kind of say, the film is ultimately about, realising that ambition and having permission as a woman to say, I'm going to do it no matter how many people, say I can't.
So that was going to be my next question is what did you learn about racing that perhaps you didn't know before? I
think the biggest thing I learned about racing is how extraordinary it is as part of the social fabric of a culture. And particularly going to the big bush races. And I did another project in Queensland last year. So I'm like 2 hours north of Mount Eliza. 2 hours north of Longreach, 3 hours south of Mount Eliza. There are 6 shops in this town. One of them is women's wear. Half the shop is racing wear. And I walked in, I was like, there's dust on this main street. There's 4 pubs, 1 Opal shop, 1 bank, a bakery, and I go, what's with the racewear? They go, the girls like to go to the Mount Eliza Cup and they like to go to Longreach and they go down to Doomben sometimes and they go up to Darwin. And it, with the criticism, that I've had to face, a little bit because people think I'm, a left-wing tree hugger, which I'm, not. My politics is extremely complex. How can I condone racing? And I absolutely did my research into really understanding how these animals are cared for and loved and the generational passion behind them. But beyond that, going to these race days, and I've been invited to every regional race cut by Vic for the next 5 years, is that these days are the days where this huge region, not only does the city celebrate, the Bendigo Cup or the, Toowoomba Cup, the much wider community come in. In a sense, as church has shrunk, racing has survived as the days we come together and we celebrate opportunity, we celebrate equality. I'm a Catholic, half my mates are Jewish. The only clubs that would have us in Australia, like almost to this day, apparently there's one Jew in the Melbourne Club, the only clubs that would have us were the turf clubs. And my dad was a member of Caulfield. He used to take me to the track up there, and he grew up with that discrimination. And I love that the turf clubs have always been inclusive. It's like equal opportunity to lose money. Anyone's allowed to lose money, you're all welcome. So that, I think that's the biggest thing, that I had no idea that it's the bush comes to the city. It's a massive industry regionally, particularly, in Victoria and in Michelle's area, Ballarat, massive employee, and there's, places in New Zealand are the same. But it's this place where we can connect, whether you're Jewish, you're Catholic, you're a billionaire, you're racing. Lloyd Williams is, in that race, is racing against a bunch of blokes from Ballarat on a horse at 100 to 1, bred out of New Zealand, and was the winner at the day. And I think racing embodies so many things that we love about being Australians that are getting harder and harder to find as society is getting, more class oriented.
I'd say that the situation in New Zealand is exactly the same. I mean, there are 50,000 people who are employed in the New Zealand racing industry who rely on it. But what did you, when you were researching the film, what did you learn about the way that the horses are cared for and how they are treated?
Well, I'd like to be treated like that, quite frankly. I mean, they say we actresses are divad. My rider's nothing like some of these little ponies that get to bring in their Shetland and, oh my God. No, well, one, they're loved and treated. Look, I think I think it's good that there's always pressure on an industry, and I think that pressure, I think Australia and New Zealand are best practice in the world. America has a long way to come, actually, to have laws on, horses riding on painkillers and, all sorts of things I think are allowed in the American racing industry that we just would not tolerate, which is extraordinary. But I've also kind of come to love, like my favourite horse, and this says a lot about me, is Chautauqua. Because it just, right? Can we just clap Chautauqua? Because what I love about Chautauqua is if a horse doesn't want to ride, he won't ride, He'll go, nah, I'm not doing that. And that's such an interesting group, the Chautauqua group, because, everyone's like, he's saying he's done. There's a couple of nights going, he's not done, he's too young to be in the paddock. And very interesting, there's a big article about Chautauqua and his mental health issues and what he may or may not like about racing. And the key Chautauqua, agitator for Chautauqua riding forward, because they've tried everything. They've tried a different saddle, they've tried a different, breakfast. He has different Wheaties now. They try everything to try to, get Chautauqua to want to race again. And only last week did one of the owners of Chautauqua suggest that perhaps Chautauqua might ride better for a girl.
Oh, I did suggest that.
But isn't that interesting? They're going to send him for like equine therapy in America, but it's like, how about actually we try to change who's riding him? And I talk about that title, Ride Like a Girl, which for me is like, I just never want to hear you doing something like a girl be said by boys an insult again, whether it's on the Australian cricket pitch at Lords, which it has been said, you throw like a girl. Girls should not have to grow up with that title as an insult. That's what it meant to me. I wanted to change what like a girl means. But I want Michelle to talk about, and this goes to Chautauqua, Michelle said it means something entirely different to her.
Yeah, well, it was funny when I heard the name Ride Like a Girl, that was the title that was going to be the name of the film, and I was like, oh yeah, I get that, like for the reasons Rachel has just stated. But for me, it was a whole different meaning. I thought that, you know, riding like a girl is, you know, seen as inferior in Australia. But from my perspective, I think we bring a whole new element to the racing with the way we ride, through kindness and through, you know, having that connection with the horse, and getting the horse to travel sweetly underneath you, and, you know, for it wanting to give you everything it's got and not having to use the whip. You know, that horse will give you everything. And I think the prime example of that at the moment is Jamie Carr, who's absolutely killing it in Victorian racing. You know, it's not to say that, you know, there's different elements that come from every rider, but for me, that is something that I'm really proud of, is to ride with the kind, soft approach, and that you can get the best out of a horse through that. And when Chautauqua was about to be retired, I did tweet to Rupert Lee, maybe you should try a female jockey.
That's interesting. Well, I think Chautauqua has got to try one more jump with a girl on him to just see if he rides for a girl.
So have you put your hand up, Michelle?
Well, I wasn't replied to.
I'm going to tweet him now.
I think that was my answer.
But I love hearing these stories. Like, I love, because when you're outside racing, you just think, you know, horses are these just animals being used for purpose. And as you get more, you know, closer to trainers and owners, and you hear the personalities of the horses, you know, it really, like, I can really see why people fall in love with a horse. And somebody told me about this horse in the 1920s or 30s in Australia, and he'd come out of the mounting yard and he'd hit the track and he'd just stop. And it wasn't until everybody applauded that he'd run off. And if the applause wasn't loud enough, he'd kind of like nod his head, and everyone would go louder and roar, and then he'd go down to the barriers. And I just love those stories because they kind of assert, you know, that they're not just beings that we humans are being, you know, using, that they have personalities that their owners and their trainers and their riders listen to and respect. And I think if you're outside racing, you don't see that. But if you're inside racing, you know the specific personality of the horse.
So obviously everybody in this room knows that Prince of Penzance was a 100-to-1 chance. Why did you have so much confidence in him?
It probably just from the whole way through when I rode Prince of Penzance, from the very first time he had a jump out at Colac, I rode him. As a 3-year-old, he basically, what sold me on him that day was he nearly slipped over on the corner, and my knee nearly touched the ground the ground was getting greasy, and he got himself back up, and within 3 strides he sprinted and like picked up the leaders.
about the greatest, footage ever seen. I went to see my very dear friend now, Simon Windsor, who directed Far Lap of the Cup and also does all these kind of extraordinary horse spectaculars. And he said, I am so jealous that you're making this movie now because you've got all these extraordinary advances in technology in terms of small cameras that I didn't have the opportunity. And he said, you are going to be able to get amongst it. And you have drones. So obviously in Australia, when you shoot racing, you can't be on the track. You've got to be on the side track. When you do American movies, they can shoot them so much better because the horses are on dirt, so they'll put vehicles on dirt. And you will never have the permission to have a vehicle on a, class A, B, C or D track in Australia because, those ruts, it's an occupational health and safety. So we tried drones, because we wanted to be in amongst it, but you always had to know where you were in the race, and that was going to be the hardest thing. We wanted to show that gap. Like, we talk about the gap for the whole movie, so we had to somehow shoot that opening in the gap, and we thought we'd get that on drones. So we tested it, and the noise of the drones was not great with the horses, so we threw that out. So we're trying all these different things. So we had, tiny cameras mounted on almost like polo sticks, shooting that low stuff. We had these Russian arms that would shoot the sections, but the Russian arm had to pull in before, one of the big poles. And then finally somebody came up with this brilliant idea that we would get the drones, we would pull the drones apart. This has never been done. And a drone is a very small remote operated camera. And then we built these mounts and hung them between the jockey's legs with the car in the kind of ambulance tracking lane, operating the drone. So Chris Simons, who does a lot of the on-camera horse and is putting little mounts, he coordinated the racing scenes. He got 3 very good riders in those races who were, so confident. They had to take a very high riding position in order to accommodate the camera. And obviously, the biggest risk is if a rider comes off and they're carrying equipment, it's, another level of danger. So, look, it was terrifying. We were shooting once a week for 8 weeks. Every day the racing unit would come back on a Monday. I think they usually shot, and I was like, did you get the gap? And they're like, no, I didn't get the gap. But we got some good stuff, but we didn't get the gap. And it wasn't until week 7 they came in. I was like, did you get the gap? And my racing director, so I didn't direct those sequences, he's extremely experienced, cinematographer and understands all the camera variances. He says, I think we got the gap. And you see that moment, for a regular audience to kind of slow that moment down, because I don't think regular audiences or regular non-racing people don't understand. I think they just think it's like a shit fight, It's action and then it's like a whole bunch of luck. No, but there is strategy, and Samuel goes on about patience. It's about seeing the opportunity and taking it when it's there, but don't be so desperate for the opportunity that you see it where it doesn't exist, and that's what patience is. So, look, it was terrifying, but Hugh Bowman said it was the best, footage he's ever seen that puts you in the jockey's position. And in order to really honour and celebrate Michelle, I had to show GP audiences from 8 to 80 how dangerous, how extraordinarily quick your instincts have to be, and, the genius of that ride. Because Michelle, after the race, there was heaps of people like, oh, she only won it because she got Barrier 1, or, oh, she only won it because it was the slowest race in history. Yeah. Whereas if any male jockey had have done that, these things wouldn't have been in question. So, I was determined to show that moment was the, as you say, the fairy tale of everything to come together after a lifetime of hard work. Like, yes, maybe if she didn't get Barrier 1, maybe she wouldn't have won it. But in that race, her horse decided to walk out of the barriers, other things, you can't predict the variables.
How the hell did you get Sam Neill? Because he's a national treasure, not only in New Zealand,
It's
but
just
in
the
Australia.
story. Ultimately, it's two things, the story and the script. So the script has to be great, and I had a great script. It has to be a compelling story. I've worked with Sam 3 times, we like each other, but it's still a huge risk for him to, go, to take time out of whatever other office he has to be away from, his home in Sydney or his spread down at the 2 paddocks, to come and do this film. So it was the script, it was the character of Paddy. He was playing a New Zealander, and that I know that was very meaningful for him because most of the time I think he's not playing New Zealanders, and his best work recently he's been playing Kiwi, let's face it. Hunt for the Water People. I think it's that, but when you have a story like Michelle's, and also he has daughters, and I have no doubt that he is inspired by that.
What did Dad think, though, of Sam Neill playing him?
Dad was, I think, quietly pleased with Sam playing his part.
But
he
Paddy doesn't really go to the movies, let's face it.
No, he doesn't. He didn't let on too much, but secretly I think he knew who it was. And he said, a bloke from New Zealand said, he'll be ideal for you, that bloke. And
he would go up and see Paddy, and I had to almost stop Sam going up because every weekend if he went up to see Paddy, he'd kind of come back with a little bit more. And there's this whole thing with the tea bag. And I'm just like, Sam, what's with this whole tea bag acting you're doing? He goes, oh, that's Paddy. I go, oh, okay, I guess we better keep it then,
But
he got quite method about it. He did go very method.
Yeah, but the one-liners, I mean, the only odds that matter are the ones you give yourself. Yeah. All of those things, are they just all textbook Paddy?
Not really, are they?
Not the odds you give yourself. Dad has a lot of one-liners, but that one I don't think is one he would say. But one thing I think that I feel lucky to have grown up with Dad was he always used to walk around the house saying, because he had 7 girls, the girls are as good as the boys, they just need the opportunities.
Well, that sounds like the one that mattered the most.
Yeah, he used to say it all the time.
I wish I'd actually known that, because I would love to have put that in the film. But that is the extraordinary thing about Paddy is that, for a man of his time, he's not running around with a, I Heart Feminism T-shirt.
No.
But he just, that was, factual for him. And this, they all worked very hard. They were all doing chores, before they got to school. Somebody told me that great story about you at Loretto about complaining how you'd be late for Loretto and you wouldn't get she wouldn't get a late pass through detention, and somebody said to whoever the girl was going, oh, well, the Payne girls never get late passes, and they said something like, well, the Payne girls have been up for 4 hours already, and they've all, they've been working, on the farm, but that Paddy only saw the abilities of his children, and he did not differentiate between the boys and the girls, and nor did he put Stephen in a box that in any way limited his professional or personal life. He's like, Stephen will have a rich professional and personal life, as he does, and that was extraordinary in that time, because when Stephen was young, the expectations of what somebody like Stephen could achieve, from society were extraordinarily low. But growing up working, and I think that's different a bit between, growing up in a farm where everybody had to pitch in, that's how you stayed together, versus growing up in the city is because Stephen worked, he grew mastery over skills, and then he grew confidence that he could master skills. And I think the most extraordinary thing, honestly, of this film is that, is that girls see Michelle and see themselves in Michelle and say, I can dream like that. And if anyone like Stephen goes to the film and says, I could do that. And I got a DM from somebody who had a girl with a disability, and halfway through the picture she leant to her mother and she said, Mummy, maybe I could work with horses. And her mum just started crying. She said she couldn't stop crying. And it was the first time her daughter had seen a place for her in the world where she could win, be respected, you know, and have a life like other people.
Has life changed much for you and Stevie?
Well, we keep pretty grounded at home. We both bought a farm together, and I'm training from there, and Stevie's working there. And I think it's very important to keep Stephen in normal, you know, everyday life, because he gets a little bit overwhelmed. But yeah, like obviously it has changed a lot in a lot of ways, but at the same time we're still doing what we love, and that's working with horses and you know, just living life really.
The thing about family, my brothers, like my brother said to me, because I'm shooting here in New Zealand, if you come back from fucking New Zealand with one of those accents, I'm going to deck ya. He goes, if you call me bro, when you come back from your TV show in New Zealand, I'm going to fucking deck ya. So, you know, no one keeps your feet on the ground like your family, right? I go, okay, yeah, no.
I did laugh though recently. Andrew, my brother, said to Stevie as a joke, hey, mate, can I get your autograph? He goes, yeah, you can get a photo as well if you like. Straight off the cup.
So in terms of, for you, what comes through in the movie is just your strength and determination. Who were your role models that made you that way?
I have to say definitely my older sisters, and obviously my older brothers as well, and Dad. But I was so lucky to grow up with, you know, my older sisters, Bridget and Therese and Marie. They were the sort of, you know, some of the first female jockeys riding in Australia, and I used to toddle off to the races.
Kiwis.
Yeah, Kiwis, exactly. Because it stems from here though, because female riders were so much more accepted over here, and so, you know, much more successful before us because it's so accepted over here. I remember coming over here to ride when I was 18 and couldn't believe that your female jockeys' rooms were as big as the males, even sometimes more females than the guys. And I just said, you know, Australia's so far behind, they haven't caught up yet, and they're still catching up.
It was the Kiwi girls who were really lobbied the Australians to change their rules so that they could go and ride across.
So we
the
have
pond.
a very special guest in the audience tonight. Marilyn Waring, are you still here? Yes, you are. Good. So Marilyn was the MP for Raglan for the Conservative National Party when she met a young jockey by the name of Linda Jones, who was taking part of one of the many girls-only races, or powder puff derbies, as they were known at the time.
Bracelet derbies, powder
Jones
puffs.
had applied to the New Zealand Racing Conference in 1976 for an apprentice licence, and she had been told she was not strong enough, married, she would take work off the male jockeys, there were no appropriate changing rooms, and she was too old. Linda was 24. In 1977, the Human Rights Bill, which included sexual discrimination, was about to be passed by the national government. Marilyn sent a copy of the bill to the New Zealand Thoroughbred Conference, suggesting that once it became law, the code would be in breach of the law. So she suggested that maybe they should change their mind.
Extraordinary.
And finally, they obliged. Linda went on to be the first woman to ride 4 winners in a day, first woman to win at Ellerslie in Auckland, first woman to compete in Auckland, Sydney and Wellington Cups, first woman to ride a winner against professional male jockeys in Australia, and she went on to race professionally in South Africa, Europe and North America. Michelle, where do you think our sport would be if it wasn't for trailblazers like Marilyn and Linda Jones?
Yeah, we'd be still trying now. Like, that's the thing is, we're so lucky to be able to stand on these heroes before us shoulders, because I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And immediately for me was my older sisters, because I watched them and, you know, that they just got out there and did it. And I remember Therese coming home a lot of the times and, you know, blowing up because Patrick had stolen her rides, and that was a pretty frequent thing. And, you know, she did so well. She was, you know, was one of the first female riders in Australia to really, you know, ride 2 and 3 winners at all the metropolitan tracks. Won a Bendigo Cup. She rode in the Adelaide Cup when she was 14 years old, which, you know, is amazing. A Group 1 race at 14. So yeah, for me, she was the ultimate role model, and I feel so lucky to have had her. And if I can be now carrying that on to the next generation is something I really feel so special about, because yeah, like I said, I wouldn't be here without, somebody like her in my life, and all of the other female jockeys that came before me.
I think also just culturally, millennials are really quite bolshy, and, I've got a 14-year-old girl, and I remember when she was like 8 years old when she said to me, when we moved back from America, and we had television, because we didn't have television in America by choice, because I was one of those mums. And she was, she goes, Mum, how come there's no girls' sports on television? And I think, culturally for the industry moving forward, I don't think the industry will be able to sustain and grow with younger generations of women won't go to the races and just watch men do stuff. It just won't be enough. Like, I'll wear a fascinator and I'll watch boys ride horses. So I think the Linda Meaches, the Katie O'Haras, definitely Michelle, I think they are inspiring another generation of girls to feel like that this is a sport, for them, whether it be breeding, training, owning, when they, or just even, as a lover, as a viewer, as a punter, that they're seeing themselves included. So I think girls will be more happily, be there on race days punting, where they see women participating at a high level. There's more female trainers coming up. Lots of, I think the, bloodstock girls are getting also, more credit and presence. And even in, I just met this gorgeous girl from Western Australia who's the daughter, I believe, of a trainer who's going to be the on-horse post-interviewer. I mean, she was fabulous. She was fabulous on stats, on horse love, on horse knowledge. She's a great rider. I think her brother's a jockey. She's going to be doing all the on-horse post
We've
interviews.
already got one of those here.
And you've got
Emily
one.
Bosson.
Because you're New Zealand, right? But for girls, like, to speak to, no sport can sustain itself only on men, whether it's AFL or rugby. Women have to feel that there's a culture in which they can also participate. Otherwise, the sport just can't grow. So I think it's incredible, I don't think everyone in that sport, I don't think men in that sport realise how critical women are, like Gay Waterhouse, like Michelle, of bringing a new generation in to love the sport and feel there's a place for them that's not just decorative. I mean, it wasn't that long ago before there were bars we weren't allowed in, in Australia. I'm sure not in New Zealand, but in Australia, there were parts of the members bars that were men only. It's like an apartheid for gender.
What do you think has been the impact on female jockeys in Australia?
In Australia, I think it's changed the mindsets of a lot of owners and trainers. Like, the owners said to me that the week before the Melbourne Cup, they had so much pressure from outside people. Oh, you can't put her on in the Melbourne Cup. No female jockeys won it. She's not going to be able to, win that race. They just told me this recently, and I was like, well, I was only the sixth female jockey to have a ride in it. So without any opportunities, we're not going to. But I think that the whole mentality of the males in the industry in Australia is changing. You're just seeing, like, Linda Meach's leading rider. She's a Kiwi, obviously, and she's been leading rider for years. But there's other girls coming through, like Jamie Carr and Raquel Clark and, Kathy O'Hara and Rachel King, who they're really just, making the most of all their opportunities. And that's the key, too, is making the most of them, and they certainly are. So it's been a long battle in Australia, but I think it's changing, and it's so exciting to see for me and for even the girls that, I've ridden against for so many years, like Linda and Nikita Berryman and those sort of girls.
I'm getting all these DMs from people, on Insta, you can DM. And they're like, "Dear Rachel, we just saw Ride Like a Girl with the family. It was so inspirational. We laughed and cried. Thank you so much. My daughter now wants to become a jockey. thanks. So I think this movie is good. All these mothers are actually horrified. You know, and I consider myself a feminist, and I'm not letting my daughter play AFL because I go, until we have a year where we don't end up in emergency, one of the children, no girl is playing AFL in this family. So it's hard. Like, it's going to be really, really interesting, because if you're not from a racing family and you're used to that risk, because we do cotton wool our children, you know, I think when your daughter announces she wants to become a jockey, you know, it's like horrific. It's like, well, don't know how that's going to happen, but I'm supportive whilst not letting you have riding lessons.
And I'm equally proud to have a 7-year-old who's in the 100th percentile for height in a rugby-loving country who's saying the same thing to me. And I unfortunately had to break it to him. I didn't think it was
wants to
possible.
Be a jockey.
He does want to be a jockey.
See, I'd be the same with rugby. I said, you know, my boy, I go, darling, your neck, it's too thin for rugby. It'll snap.
Yeah. On that note, have we got any questions from the crowd that you would like to ask? Marianne, you'll have a question.
Thrown in the deep end.
Rachel, do you own a horse, and is Michelle going to ride it?
Rachel, do you own a horse?
I do own a horse.
Do you own a horse? Sorry.
I do own a horse. I'll tell you a funny story about that. I went to Gay Waterhouse to get money out of her, because I had to raise a lot of money for this picture. And everybody said to me, you're never going to get money out of Gay, but be very careful you don't walk away with a share in a horse. And I saw her 3 times, and every time I went, I was like, I want money, I don't want a horse. I want money, I don't want a horse. And she would segue. She'd go, yes. You know, Rach, there's 1 share in this fabulous filly. And I got away. But I am in a horse that Michelle's training. And it's, you know, rat bag mob. There's, you know, a billionaire. There's some netballer friends from Michelle at school, a couple of very dear friends of mine. And that's what I kind of love about racing on the days that it's won, where it's like, oh, are you in it? Are you in it? You know, who are you? And it's lovely. Like, I could never imagine actually wanting to own a horse by yourself, because it's just so much more fun with people. Michelle I keep getting the disappointed. So, no, we won't be doing spring. We'll be doing Ascot. But we're looking good.
I will say, I think she's my best horse. She's a horse called Sweet Rocket. And she's...
You don't have to say this because I'm here.
No, I'm just saying.
Talk it up.
She's one to follow anyway. And yeah, I'm lucky enough to be the rider and the trainer of her. So
everybody said to me, you can't expect your first horse to be a winner, because it'll all be downhill from there.
It's true. But, well, she is a winner already. She won at Mini Valley last year.
She did.
And she's really promising, so it's very exciting.
When will we see her line up again?
When will we see her line up again?
She's going to be racing in the autumn, so we'll see her stepping out in February, I think. February,
Is she
March.
3 now or 2?
She's just turned 4.
Just turned 4.
She just needed time.
Oh my God, I've been paying for that long.
Yeah. I give you mates rates. So yeah, my dream is to get her to Royal Ascot. I am one to dream big.
Too.
But she's a really promising horse. Like, she beat Mystic Journey, and when she won at Mini Valley, it was only over 1,200 metres, but it was a really class field. She sat 3 wide that day facing the breeze and was just too strong. She's one of the 5 horses, I would say, in my career that gives me the X Factor field.
Yay.
So at Royal Ascot's my next dream with her.
Nice.
Yep.
Michelle, just around your injury, how you managed to overcome that and the fear that you might have had to get back up onto the horse and ride again, like what that was sort of like for you?
Initially, the first one when I was 18 and fractured my skull, I didn't remember the fall firstly, which was probably a blessing because I was knocked out. And the first 2 weeks I don't really remember. The first 3 months was really difficult. Like, I remember being almost suicidal because I thought I'm never going to be normal again. You know, I couldn't say the alphabet. I couldn't think straight. I'd forget anything you'd said an hour ago to me. But it was just this massive drive to still compete at a high level in the racing industry that kept me going. So there was no fear coming back from that one because I was so driven in achieving at the highest level. But there were some falls after that where I had really bad concussions and where I wasn't knocked out in, that I could remember actually seeing the ground coming at me, and the field ran over me in one race. It was about a field of 15 runners, and I couldn't get that image out of my head. But I went and saw a psychologist, and she just suggested some techniques to use, and straight away fixed me. I was actually going to retire at one point because I couldn't get that fear out of my brain, but you know, I wasn't ready to retire and I didn't want to, but I had to fix that, and she did. So yeah, there's so many different techniques and ways that I never even would have dreamed of. But yeah, I think it was just always this passion to achieve, you know, goals that I had, and at the highest level, because, you know, I thought if I worked really hard and tried really hard, I could. So that sort of kept me going. Thank you.
I think one question from me. Who are you liking in the Melbourne Cup?
Surprise Baby.
Tell us about Surprise Baby.
I think it's just always such an open race. You could pick 15 horses and still miss the winner. But I just think he's just got all the credentials to say that he's in with such an amazing chance. And it'd be so great, you know, for us to still be able to hang on to the Melbourne Cup in Australasia. I know he's Kiwi bred, but...
oh, is he Kiwi?
Yeah.
The same breeders, actually.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Colleen and John, who are here today.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I've met you earlier and I didn't realise you're actually the breeder of Prince of Penzance.
Yeah, well, Michelle's been to the farm a few times.
Regretting selling that little pony, or...?
Don't bring it up.
I'm sorry. But you can dine out on and hopefully value add from that, can't you?
Yeah,
Does it mean a lot when you've bred a Melbourne Cup winner? Is that huge?
Well, just to have a runner of these days is a big thing. If
Yeah.
we're all on the farm and we have a big screen at home, we all got all the start visits at 5 o'clock, and we were watching this race, and in the movie when Michelle was on the fence, the cameras flashed away and did that ground shot.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden she's out in the open, and I'm saying, this thing's going to win. You know? And at 100 to 1, and Karen, one of our staff, had $10 each way on it.
Well done.
Well done, Karen.
No, it was a great feeling, great feeling. And we had a full brother to sell at the sales too.
Well, that's a nice timing, isn't it?
He's still improving too, that horse.
Yeah,
Head of the
head
throne.
of the
Yeah.
Is he as much a total bastard prick as Prim?
Well,
He's a tricky horse, isn't he? He's not the sweetest fellow.
Well, it comes from their father, Kentai. He was known that they were tough horses, but
Yeah.
very
Feisty.
Yeah, feisty.
Yeah.
I actually tried to buy Head of the Throne, but he went for too much money. Yeah. I might be able to get another one.
From the movie.
You know when the Melbourne Cup, you get the Strappers Cup and the Jockeys Cup and the Melbourne Cup. Is there a little cup that goes to the breeder? Oh, I want a photo of that.
Well, hopefully you've got another one coming your way. Good luck.
Oh, well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
sharing
Kate.
your story, and thank you for making it, Rachel. Ride Like a Girl, October 24th in cinemas. Tell all your friends to get along and watch it.
Thank you.